And I almost want to say that I feel bad that it's taken me freaking 18 years of my goddamn career as a trainer to understand this. And I've kind of been maybe your typical fucking male approach of like, just fucking power through it. You'll be fine. But I do understand that biologically and hormonally, there are some accommodations that need to be changed and need to be made on both your diet and both your training. What is up, everybody? Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good day. Episode 45, we're going to talk about an interesting subject. I will say this is actually probably one of the more, not time-consuming, but very interesting data collection things for me in an episode, because it's going to feel like a little bit of a stretch for me. My wife was like, wait, you're talking about this today? And I'm talking about how men are solar and women are lunar. And most people are going to be like, what the fuck does that even mean? How this topic came to mind is I've heard a lot over the last few years that like women should be more careful with fasting, or women should be a little bit more careful with doing cold plunges. You know, like I kind of hear that, and I never really dove into the science or to the data, but I've heard it, right? And I always just assumed that I'm like, okay, it has to be more on something with the hormonal cycle, right? There has to be something on the cycle. There's something on the hormone system of like a female versus a male that would even cause somebody to bring up that subject or that conversation, right? So when I say men are solar, men actually have a 24-hour cycle, right? Women have a 28-day cycle, which is like the moon, right? So lunar. And I was like, oh, that's kind of poetic. That sounds good. Men are solar, women are lunar. So I'm going to go into this a little bit more, and there's a lot of stuff on the women's side that I have just learned from the first time, and I would love for anybody to correct me on the newsletter or the YouTube or the posts that come from this, because I'm sure maybe I screwed up some stuff, but I did my best to write down as many things as I could to not screw those things up. And to be transparent with you, I think this is a subject that I would love to bring somebody that is a professional. It doesn't matter if it's just even a woman coach in the fitness space, or if it's someone that at a doctor PhD level that understands this at a very, granular, visceral level that understands the data. So I was saying this to, I was actually saying this to Coach Tony, and I was like, oh, she was talking about something, whatever. We were talking about women's cycle or training or something like that. And I was like, oh, men have cycles too, right? And she's like, no, they don't. Like, she thought it was just like literally fucking around. And I was like, no, I'm not. Like, they do have cycles. It's a different cycle. So when we think about this and what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to talk a lot about the hormones, right? And I'm also more specific. This might obviously be more a female kind of focused podcast, so there might obviously just be more attraction for females wanting to listen to this or hear this information, but I think it's good I was excited to learn it because I just didn't know it. There are a lot of things that we do have the exact same response to, right? So we have, if you look at the melatonin spike that happens at night that makes us go to bed, right? And like these bell-shaped curves that we see with most things. There is a circadian biology to the human body, right? And a lot of the data that even just from research this morning and last night that I was looking, or this morning, I'm sorry, that I was looking into, I was like, man, a lot of this stuff that I think was created or but we're educated on might be more specific to the biology of a male than it is a female, right? So have females been misled in certain topics or certain areas that we're all not just the same? Like women are not just smaller men. There's a famous quote, I forget what her name is, that says that. And I'm like, hey, now I can tell you right now, there might be some actual science behind it, which is cool. So there are a lot of things, though, that are the same, right? So that melatonin spike in the evening, right? The cortisol spike that we get the first thing in the morning that wakes us up, the growth hormone spike that we get in the middle of the night during deep stages of sleep, the ghrelin spike that we get from 4 to 8 p.m., the leptin spike that we get from midnight to 4 a.m. Trying to think if there's any of the ones I'm not thinking about. There's plenty of them, I'm sure, right? There's a lot of them that are the exact same response and the exact same shape on a graph for male and female. The degree of that can obviously be a little subjective, and there's plenty of context to that as well. So what I'm going to talk about is like, what are the things that are different, right? So when we think about the first thing that comes to mind, I think for most of us as a male and female and the difference in hormone, we think, man, okay, all this testosterone, well, there used to be, the modern human doesn't really, the modern man doesn't have it, unfortunately. And then we think about a woman, we think about progesterone, we think about estrogen, obviously, those kind of dominant ones. So these are like the, inverse relationship of each other too, right? And like they have in a sense, there's some parallels in like how they act and what they function on the body, right? So a man, just remember this: testosterone peaks at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning. So just think about it like your first 3 to 4 hours of being up is when testosterone is going to be at the highest. Then it drops by about 30 to 50% at the end of the day, right? And I was actually telling this to my wife this morning. I was like, see, when I get at home at the end of the day and I just feel a little tired, or I feel like I don't want to talk, or I feel like my social battery is drained, maybe there's actually some hormones that are playing a role into this too. I transparently, up to today, always thought that it's just like social battery is dead because I've been talking to people all day. I'm a little obviously just tired and fatigued from working all day. But you feel less social, like towards that part of the day for me, with less I'm like going out drinking and obviously enhanced with some alcohol. But like for the most part, I've always felt that. But a 30 to 50% drop by the time you get to the evening, right? Cortisol spikes sharp first thing in the morning, like we talked about, growth hormone peaks. So the testosterone cycle that I'm talking about is peaking in the morning, lowest, the trough is obviously going to be towards the evening time, right? And that is just a 24-hour cycle that we think about. So for a man, when you think about the relationship of testosterone and the training or the eating schedules or the ability to fast, there's the interesting thing that I'll talk about, I'm sure, at the end of the episode again. But like, I was kind of looking up, just like, does all this stuff that I looked up, does that make a man more resilient to stress than a female? And I think a better way to look at it is not necessarily that a man has better resilience to stress. There might be some context or some truth behind that, but more so that it's more important for a female to protect the stress response and understand the stress response during certain parts of a cycle, right? Because from a reproductive health perspective, like if we were to think about this on an evolutionary scale, right? Why would a woman have these 4 different phases through her cycle, right? And why would certain things inhibit the reproductivity of a cycle, right? And if you think about this and some of the stuff that I looked up, was basically like, hey, like, for example, if a woman's really chronically stressed or malnourished or overtraining, under eating, well, I already talked on that, underslept, whatever that might be, it starts to affect her cycle. It starts to affect her reproductivity, right? And her ability to reproduce, right? So there's more downstream effects, I think, on some of the hormonal and the reproductive side of it that have a bigger negative impact when someone's stressed. Versus a man, yes, it's going to impact testosterone, it's going to impact sleep, it's going to impact belly fat and visceral fat. So like, I don't want to say that like a man obviously is just like able to handle more stress, because I don't know if that's necessarily true, right? I don't know if I can have data to really prove that. Like, now there might be some aspects of the hormone increase with testosterone, or the ability for like how sharp the cortisol spike is for a man in the morning versus a female. But like I said, I think there's more negative consequences downstream that you need to be aware of. So on the women's side, I wrote all these down because it's like, I don't really know this very well. Phase 1, the menstrual cycle, is day 1, day 5, right? So when you think about training, right? And the interesting thing is when you look at the graph of a 28-day cycle, right? You're going to see estrogen and progesterone are going to start like damn near flat and very low at the very bottom of this menstrual cycle, right? And then as these cycles and these phases increase, you're going to see estrogen go up, and it's going to peak right around that ovulation phase, and then it's going to drop, it's going to come back up, and then it's going to drop back down, right? And when you see progesterone, you're going to see that more in the luteal phase, that it's actually just going to be almost kind of flat, then you're going to have this huge spike and probably, day 21, but like halfway through your luteal cycle, that's where you're going to get the spike of that, and then it comes back down. So estrogen's like up, down, right? So this menstrual phase 1, what I've looked up and what I found is actually from a training perspective, you should be more aware of not having super intense training. Like, these should not be your peak weeks. So more gentle training, more walking, more mobility, more yoga. When it comes to eating, obviously prioritizing protein, prioritizing even more iron during this phase is something. But like, more importantly, like, don't restrict calories during this phase, right? Because how the relationship to the hormones is going to dictate a lot of this stuff. And this will connect more dots in a second as I go through this. Phase 2 is the follicular cycle, right? So days 6 through 14, which was interesting, what they call the solar week. These is where you're starting to see the increase in estrogen, right? So as estrogen starts to creep up, progesterone's starting to slowly creep up, but estrogen mainly, this is where you can start to push hard, right? This is where estrogen is rising, so you can train a little bit harder. If you were to restrict calories, this would be the phase to do it, right? So day 16 to day 14. So phase 2, the follicular cycle, this is when you can kind of push a little bit harder. Phase 3, which is we're just thinking peak ovulation, right? I remember this one from trying to get pregnant. Training, peak power, peak speed, max effort. So like when you think about that phase, right? So day 6 to day 15, that's the phase that we can be, in a sense, from the stress response side of things, we can be more on it because we're getting more protection from what estrogen is driving, right? So if you were to think about, oh, if I do want to cut calories, or if I do want to train a little bit more intensely, or if I do want to go for some of these peak lifts or peak speeds or peak runs, like if I had the ability to be tracking my cycle as a female, and if I had the ability to also shape my training around that, in the perfect world, that's the time that you would do it, right? So I bring up all those kind of adjectives and nuances around like if you could, if you were, because at the end of the day, yes, you can power through all of it. I'm not saying like for the men, for example, they say because testosterone's high in the morning, that this is the best time to maybe work out, or most importantly, like get your hard work done, get your focus work done, because that's where you're going to have from a hormone side, you're going to have more drive in the morning. And I can say that as a man, that I definitely have way more drive in the morning to be productive, right? So from that like 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., I feel like I can be really productive. Then I start to see the drop that I naturally have. I never knew if it was a hormonal thing or whatever. But from the female side of it, that conversation is like from a training, you can't be, in a sense, if we're to just talk about the hormone side of it, you can't be as consistent with like, okay, I'll give you guys an example. Functional lifestyles, we run in a 6-week cycle. We run technically on a 13-week mesocycle, but we go 6 weeks of training. We run a second 6 weeks phase, which is more progressive, than we deload. And we always say week 5, week 6, peak weeks. Go for heavy lifts. Go for your top like lifts on your volume or your weight, whatever it might be. Week 1 and 2 is reaccommodate, recalibrate. Week 3 and 4, you're building up a little bit more volume. Now, if I were to talk to a female now, knowing what I know here, like that is going to give me a degree of context that like, if you're on week 6 of a functional lifestyle cycle, but you're in your menstrual phase or you're in your luteal days or that phase, the last phase of your cycle, then like hormonally, you're not going to be actually set up as good to be handling the stress or training as hard, or the energy that you want to be able to give to those type of things changes, right? So I thought that was kind of like an interesting thing because like, honestly, like I keep saying this, I didn't know this shit. Phase 4, luteal days, right? So this is day 15 through day 28. So this is now the second half of the cycle. And you have an early phase of this, and you have a late phase. So early luteal is day 15 to 21. This is where training can still remain moderate because now we're starting to get the estrogen drop. Now we're starting to get the progesterone peak obviously happens kind of like I said in the early to mid part of the luteal phase, right? Then the late phase is where you generally want to start lowering intensity again, right? And also, another thing I learned when we think about this term PMS, and I was even asking as I was doing some data, I'm like, I don't know if this is politically correct to say this or not, but I'm like the moody phase or the more emotional phase, and it was like, that's not politically incorrect, Corey. It is just it is the part of the process and response that happens, and that happens on the late phase, right? So like that last part of the cycle, right before we go into the menstrual phase. That's where you're getting that. And why that happens, I was like, that was interesting to me because, okay, I'll give you guys the eating thing just so I can finish this up. Increasing carbs and increasing calories. The craving that you're getting is a normal thing, and you should not be trying to restrict calories during this phase. Here's why. Estrogen and progesterone reduce the ability for your body to access liver and muscle glycogen, meaning that those hormones are what allows us to utilize what is stored in the liver and what is stored in the muscle. So when you think about those peaks that you get or the high points of the estrogen and progesterone, you're able to utilize more of what you have stored, which is why it is a better opportunity for during that phase to reduce calories if you wanted to, or if that was part of your goal, or to train harder, to burn more, to do your cold plunging, to do your fasting, like to do these things that maybe in certain parts of the cycle we would deem as not ideal, right? But when you get to the very back end, like that last week, right before you get into the menstrual phase, that's where you actually want to start adding some carbs back and adding some calories back and maybe reducing the intensity of the training, right? And I almost want to say that I feel bad that it's taken me freaking 18 years of my goddamn career as a trainer to understand this process. Because I train, majority of my clients are females, right? My personal training clients. So I train more female clients than I do male clients. And I've kind of been maybe your typical fucking male approach of like, just fucking power through it. You'll be fine. And I say that even to myself sometimes that like, and I don't want this to feel on the other end. I'm not just completely turning and flipping a table that it's just like, okay, now I'm going to be super easy on everyone during these phases for my female clients. Like, I still think that there's an aspect of mindset. I still think there's an aspect of discipline that can be trained, but I do understand that biologically and hormonally, there are some accommodations that need to be changed and need to be made on both your diet and both your training. And I'm a little upset that it took me that long to kind of go through the data and go through the science to really realize that. And honestly, I don't know if it's just my content or my algorithm doesn't feed me this, probably because I just don't maybe follow this content. But like, I also think it should maybe be talked about a little bit more, right? So I love the statement of men are solar and women are lunar, right? So understand that the menstrual, the phase 1, and the late luteal phase, those are times where we should reduce stress as much as possible, right? Those are times, it's easy said and done. Those are the times maybe that we should reduce the intensity of training, right? Those are times that we should add calories back. We should prioritize protein. We should add a little bit of carbohydrates back. Low carb for a woman during these phases, not a good thing. Like, you want to have that stuff. For most men and women, having low carb is not necessarily something I promote, right? Restricting calories is obviously the way that we lose weight. For a woman or a female, it might be a little bit different phases of how we cycle calories or carbs versus a man. Like a man, we might be able to just go on a very calendar point of view just because of this 24-hour cyclical approach. But for a woman being more on a 28-day phase, like, yeah, there needs to be some accommodations that are made. So I'm sure there's plenty of people listening to this being like, wow, that's kind of an odd conversation for a man to have, and B, just like for me, period. Because like, I don't normally talk about it. I would love to have someone come on this podcast and actually educate me even to a more granular level, like I mentioned earlier. But I thought it was super interesting because I think it is something that like, for trainers maybe listening to this or coaches listening to this, I obviously send this newsletter out to thousands of people. So I think it's kind of an interesting subject that I think everyone should be aware of. And I think accommodations need to be made or maybe even better understood, right? Because I think it allows to coach and lead with empathy a little bit. That is just a part of the phase, right? Like, we grew up, like when I was with my family, my dad was always like, yeah, like, I marked the calendar red this week. We get out, right? I'm always like, yeah, like that was just always the joke in the house. But like, there's actually things changing, right? And my dad used to always say this. He's like, just be thankful that you're a man. You don't have to go through this stuff, because I think about this with my wife being pregnant right now, that it's so much harder with the biological stuff that she has to go through, right? With A, the cycle itself, and B, carrying a fucking child, birthing the child, so that there's so much more demand, I know, on a woman, right? And it's also interesting to kind of see just some of this stuff too. So, I hope I led that conversation without offending anybody, because my goal is not to. My goal was just to educate some, for maybe those that didn't know. And for the women that know, obviously, that they all have cycles, maybe you didn't know that the reason why you should be increasing calories and carbs and reducing training intensity is because estrogen and progesterone are the things that create the ability for your body to actually utilize the fuel more effectively. Not at all. Doesn't mean you can't tap into it, but just more effectively. All right. Well, I hope I didn't butcher that one. So thanks for listening. I'll see you guys next time.